At night, when the bell in the settlement rang out the last watch, a bundle wrapped in canvas was brought to the herbalist's house. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, a jar of dark honey, and a narrow notebook that smelled of smoke. Someone had scratched a mark on the cover that resembled a letter from a monastery book. The apprentice girl turned the pages and saw lists of women, dates, amounts for healing rituals, and notes about secret visits to the monastery. Fear clenched in her stomach. Rumors of strange recipes had been circulating for a month, but now they had turned into weighty records. In the morning, she went to confession and handed over the scroll, hoping that everything would end quickly and quietly. I greet viewers as a male narrator. Please write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and I wish you pleasant listening. Then something happened that the village was not prepared for. The local clergyman said he would check the notebook and return it to its owner, but the notebook disappeared. On the same day, people began to approach the herbalist's door, asking if it was true that forbidden potions were being brewed in the house. The girls saw the clergyman talking to the manager of the noble patron's estate. They stood by the stable and twirled a leather bag with wax on a string in their hands. The girl recognized the seal because she had rewoven the threads for candles in the temple many times and had seen this mark on custom candles. She remembered the detail and said nothing. Her name was Margarita. She grew up in the house of the herbalist Matteo, repaired mortars, boiled decoctions for fever, and wrote down in a notebook who was given how much. In the settlement, she was considered the old man's shadow and was not taken seriously. She was considered convenient, small, quick, silent. She listened quietly as the women whispered about the rituals for which they paid with grain and oil. At first, everyone thought it was just a new way to treat shameful illnesses, but tears, fear, and promises of silence flashed in their conversations. Margarita began to compare what she remembered from the missing notebook with the parish lists. In the evening, when the bell rang for vespers, she would go to the sacristy under the pretext of helping and look for the amounts paid for candles, records of private prayers, and donations to the monastery. Surprisingly, the lines formed a single pattern. On the days when the notebook mentioned rituals, donations from the same courtyard appeared in the parish book, and new rolls of expensive wax went into the monastery's coffers. The village did not have this money, so someone rich was paying, someone who could buy silence. Meanwhile, the cleric said that there was no notebook and that all talk should cease. He assured the manager that the noise would harm the patron, because the name of a noble person would appear in the rumors. The manager whispered that it would be better to burn the paper and forget about it. Margarita heard this from behind the wall as she carried herbs for incense to the temple. These words were simple and frightening. She realized that her confession had been turned into silence. From that day on, small but persistent threats began. Someone carved a witch's mark on the fence of the herbalist's house. By evening, a bundle of bees wrapped in flax and a jar of soot were found on the doorstep. It looked like ordinary village mischief, but each item carried a message. Shut up. A situation that seemed like a trivial everyday occurrence turned into suspense. Every shadow at night looked like a messenger from the monastery. Every rustle outside the window seemed like footsteps. Old Matteo became heavy and silent. He stopped teaching Margarita, hid the mortars, and lowered his eyes when she asked about the notebook. At noon on the third day, a messenger from the monastery came to the house. He brought a simple bundle of herbs and a brief demand to return the notes that had accidentally found their way into the house. The bundle bore a seal with the same ribbon from the leather pouch. Margarita recognized it and realized that the monastery wanted not medicine, but paper. She did not find the notebook at the cleric's, nor in Matteo's chests, nor in the sacristy. But she still had her memory, the numbers, and the unfamiliar seals in her eyes. She did what no one in the village had thought of. She took the parish donation lists, the records for candles and orders for memorial services, made copies of the marks, and began to arrange them in rows. The quiet woman from below showed an attentiveness and precision unheard of in the village. It was her hidden craft, seeing how one number clings to another, how other people's hands leave marks on the wax, how a thread passes through the same knot. When she brought her notes to Matteo, the old man sat at the table for a long time, touching her numbers with his finger, and finally admitted what he had been afraid to say. He said that at the beginning of spring, he had been given prescriptions with the monastery seal. They contained healing words, seasoned with instructions that could be interpreted as permission for violence under the guise of help. The old man realized this too late. He did not attach any importance to it, because he trusted the seal and the white sleeves. But now, looking at Margarita's rose, he saw how it all fit into a pattern. From that moment on, they became connected. Margarita held in her hands the idea that both the clergyman and the manager lacked. She saw that the monastery and its patron fed each other. One gave the seal, the other brought wax and silence, and between them stood the women who came at night and left in silence. The village began to whisper louder. Rumors spread like salt on cloth at the gate of the shop. Someone recalled how messengers with stamped ribbons came to the monastery in winter. Someone remembered how the manager had acquired a new cloak and the cleric a new book. Margarita knew that this was not proof, but she also knew something else. If you put small stones together to build a wall, you get a path. One day, a cart loaded with wool drove up to the bridge. A merchant from afar sat on the shaft. He stopped at the herbalist's gate and asked for water. While he was drinking, he looked closely at the seals on the candle box. He said he recognized the mark because the same seal was used on letters from a certain trading house. His words sounded like a key in a lock. The merchant realized that it was not only incense that was being brewed inside the settlement. He showed his debt book, where the margins had the same pattern as the ribbon. Margarita was greatly alarmed. Now she had a thread leading to the city. The merchant's name was Lambert. He had been to fairs in Milan and Como, and in winter he lived for long periods in houses with stone floors. He was an outsider, but his account book and seals were worth more than any village words. He said he could confirm the origin of the wax and the path of the money. His unexpected willingness to intervene broke the deadlock. In the evenings, Margarita began to visit the monastery under the pretext of buying ointments. She saw the cleric exchanging papers with the monastery cellarer, bundles of sealing wax disappearing into the storeroom, and the dwarf bell ringer collecting the broken pieces of seals in a box. Everyone thought the bell ringer was simple-minded because he limped and rarely spoke. He was short and always walked with his head down. But he was collecting evidence without realizing it. He brought home every broken seal, like a child collecting shiny stones. Margarita thought to ask him for the box. She explained that she wanted to repair a candle stamp. The bell ringer nodded and gave it to her. In the box were fragments of seals with two different patterns. One was monastic, the other was ancestral. Putting the fragments together revealed a new pattern. Thus, the evidence became not only a number, but also a thing. But the cleric sensed that someone was getting close to his threads. At night, the roof of the herbalist's house caught fire. The fire was small and quickly extinguished, but everyone understood that it was no accident. The next morning, the old man was summoned to the monastery. He returned late, gloomy and without his hat. He said that he had been ordered to keep quiet. Otherwise, Margarita would be called the witch's minion. Margarita realized that simple calculations would no longer help. She went to Lambert and asked him to show the book to someone higher than a cleric. Lambert replied that a bishop's commission would soon be in town to investigate the collections. He said he could bring her people at night, so as not to cause a commotion. He did not like to meddle in the affairs of other parishes, but he said that he saw in the lists what he had seen in his hometown before the great disaster: money from one courtyard and seals joined by two hands. Margarita knew that now it was not only her fate that was at stake. She remembered her mother. Her mother was a laundress at the patron's estate and died slowly, like a fire dying in a stove. She said that a nobleman who came at night promised to help. After her death, Margarita was brought to the house by a herbalist. He said that her mother had asked for her. He said that he had to fulfill his duty to the woman from the village. For a long time, Margarita did not ask why the old man had taken her in as his own, even though he could have refused. Now the question arose. Old Matteo only spoke about it at night, when smoke was coming through the window again. He said that many years ago, his sister worked in the monastery kitchen and went to work as a servant in the patron's estate. He said that one of the patron's sons came to the monastery and left gifts. He said that the same man had left a stranger's child and a sack of flour in the settlement. Matteo hinted that this son was now their cleric. The words sent a chill down her spine. Margarita understood why the cleric was so nervous about hiding the seals and so protective of the nobleman's name. It turned out that the patron was feeding his own son, and the son was turning a blind eye to evil. It was a hidden kinship, concealed in the gray fabric of the settlement. It explained too much. Margarita decided to move quickly. On the appointed day, Lambert brought people from the city. It was a small group led by the bishop's clerk. They came without torches and without noisy footsteps, in dark cloaks and empty-handed. They asked for only two items: Lambert's book and a box with the fragments of the seals. They listened to Margarita as one listens to a master at his work, without interrupting, clarifying dates and amounts. The clerk noted that the rows converged on the days of the night rituals. He noted that the soft wax of the same courtyard was used in the seals on the monastery's letters. At night, they went to the sacristy and checked the candle folds. The wax was the same as Lambert had noted in his book, as expensive and rare. In the basement, they found a bag with the same ribbon. In the sacristan's room, they found recipes written in one hand but with two seals. In the cleric's room, they found an empty envelope with traces of a removed seal. The bell ringer, who thought he was unnoticed, stood at the door holding his simple lantern. He was there at the right moment. Before that, he was considered superfluous, but he quietly helped illuminate every trace. It all looked like the work of a master glassmaker, unobtrusive, smooth, without unnecessary words. Then, old Matteo asked to speak before the clerk. He admitted that he had allowed the monastery's recipes to enter the house. He admitted that he had not checked the text because he trusted the seal. He said that he now saw how coercion was being disguised as treatment. He asked for protection for Margarita and said he was ready to suffer punishment for his blindness. His voice did not tremble, but his hands were cold. The clerk made no promises. He said he would report to the bishop. He said that a decision would be made at dawn. At dawn, a white fog hung over the settlement. The village went about its business as usual. The stove was lit, the cattle were fed, and the women went to fetch water. No one knew that during the night the bishop's men had walked around the monastery like shadows. In the cleric's room, a new book lay on the table, which he had not had time to hide. It contained notes about helping those in need, with a note about compensation to the patron. Each line was linked to the names of women who had recently shied away from the herbalist's door. The bishop's commission arrived the same day, but without the ringing of bells. They entered through the side gate and immediately summoned the cleric. He said he knew nothing, that the parishioners were talking too much, that the notebook had not been given to him. He said the women were making it up. He spoke calmly, but his eyes darted around. When the clerk placed the fragments of the seals on the table and put them together, two connected patterns emerged. He looked at the cleric and said nothing. The cleric covered his face with his hands. Margarita stood silently by the wall. She did not seek attention. She knew that remembering her mother now was dangerous because it would connect her to her patron. But fate itself had led her to this. The estate manager entered the room. He began to assure them that the court had always made donations to the poor. He began to talk about mercy and care. The clerk asked him to explain why the expensive wax from the city shop, recorded in Lambert's book, was found on the monastery seals on the very days when the notebooks about rituals contained amounts for night visits. The manager fell silent. Then Lambert, not being a man of the church but having a firm account, showed his records. He had sold that batch of wax to a noble house. He noted that one seal for the stamp was unique, with a craftsman's mistake. That seal now lay on the clerk's desk. Lambert said that such a mistake happened once a year. The people in the room understood that the evidence was not in words, but in things. Then the cleric named the monastery's cellarer. He said that it was he who had planted the recipes. He said that those sheets had been brought with a seal, and he believed it. He said that he had thought about peace and order, not about people. He said he did not want the nobleman's name to be tarnished. He did not say the word father, but everyone understood who he was referring to when he covered up someone else's guilt. The hidden connection became obvious. The commission decided to conduct an inspection of the estate. The manager resisted, but could not refuse. In the patron's chest, they found another bag with ribbons, the same as those found on the cleric and in the monastery basement. In the estate's account book, they found records of reimbursement for monastery expenses next to the dates of the nightly rituals. The court was known for its generosity, but that generosity turned out to be a cover for something else. In the evening, the people in the settlement began to discuss how everything would turn out. Some feared that everyone would be accused and the village punished. Others feared that the monastery would take revenge. Still, others said that the cleric would leave and everything would be forgotten. Margarita listened and remained silent. She understood that her entry was only one key. A twist was needed that would fall into place at the very end. This twist was made by a person no one would have thought of. The bell ringer brought an old iron mold for seals to the herbalist's house. He found it behind the sacristy, where broken things were thrown away. He noticed that part of the pattern on the mold matched that on the fragments in the box, but there was a small crack that revealed whose mold it was. He could not write, but he could recognize iron. He showed the crack to the scribe. The crack was the same as on the cleric's seal. This meant that the seals were made in one place, by the sacristan's hands, and the cleric kept some of the molds for himself. The bell ringer, whom everyone considered a nobody, became the one without whom the pattern would not have come together. The underestimated man turned out to be the one who turned the conversations into evidence. When the clerk gathered the evidence together, he said that the report would be harsh. He said that the monastery had covered up other people's affairs, that the rituals served as a screen for violence, and that the cleric was protecting not people, but the honor of the court connected to him by blood. He said that old Matteo admitted his guilt and asked for a chance to make amends. He added that Margarita needed protection as a witness. The news spread from house to house. Women came to their gates and looked at the road, as if their past fears were about to pass by and disappear. But fears do not walk on legs. They sit in people's heads. Then Margarita did something that seemed insignificant, but turned out to be significant. She hung a small wooden sign on the herbalist's door. It said that the house no longer accepted secret rituals, and that every potion would be recorded and signed with two hands, hers and the old man's. It looked simple, like an entry in an account book, but it meant the end of dark visits. The noble house tried to strike back. A collector appeared in the square and announced that Margarita was spreading slander. He said that the court would file a complaint. He tried to disperse the people, like a shepherd driving a flock, but a woman, a laundress and friend of Margarita's late mother, stepped forward from the crowd. She said that many years ago she had seen the same nobleman at night by the monastery wall. She said that after that night, her friend fell ill and died a year later. Her words rang out like thin metal. People believed her, not because she shouted, but because her story coincided with the rhythm of all the evidence found. On the third day after the commission's arrival, the cleric was removed. He was sent to another house, far from the settlement. The monastery cellarer was locked in a cell until the bishop's decision. The manager was obliged to return the money for the donations made under cover. The court was ordered to pay for candles for all those who had suffered and to feed the monastery refectory for a year without the right to seal it. It was not a prison sentence, but it was a public admission of guilt. For the settlement, it meant more than the whip. Matteo asked the commission to grant Margarita the right to record and keep notebooks. The clerk agreed. He gave her a thin book with blank pages and said through an interpreter that from now on she would keep order instead of a seal. Margarita took the book and felt its weight, which did not oppress her. She was given not gold, but trust. The last link remained, quiet and important. Lambert, a collector of accounts from afar, was about to leave. He told Margarita through an interpreter that he knew her mother. He said that many years ago, a young laundress had helped him get his money back when the monastery had mixed up the marks on the bags. He said that this woman had saved him from loss, and he had not had time to thank her. He said that now he had fulfilled his duty. He left a bag of silver for medicine and a book of blank pages in the herbalist's house. He was an unexpected benefactor who came not because he wanted glory, but because he remembered his duty. In the evening, Margarita sat by the window with a book. She thought about how it all began with a narrow knot left in the night. She thought about how rumors turned into numbers, numbers into fragments of seals, fragments into a connected pattern, and the pattern into a solution. She thought about how the bell ringer's tiny habit of collecting broken things became the key, how the merchant from afar turned out to be the link, how the old man admitted his mistake instead of hiding it. She thought that in their world there were no quick victories, only the slow movements of people who finally stopped being silent. Since then, the settlement has changed, not for better or worse, but for more honest. People brought their old rituals to the herbalist's house, not as a secret, but as a story. Each case was recorded in simple words. There were no insults or loud accusations. There was recognition and order. This became justice. No one brought back the lost years, but they stopped what could have continued for a long time. Margarita did not seek revenge. She recorded herbs and dates as best she could. She looked at the seals as objects, not as miracles. When asked how she did it, she replied through retelling that she simply put together what everyone saw but did not connect. Her quiet talent defeated status because it was more patient and honest. Once, a new girl came to the settlement, brought from the monastery kitchen. She stood at the threshold holding an empty pot. Margarita gave her a sheet of paper and said through a retelling that all work begins with writing. The girl smiled and sat down next to her, and the bell in the tower rang out with a short, high-pitched and long sound. The bell ringer raised his head and smiled too. He understood that his box of iron had found a place in someone else's story. None of this was a miracle. It was the work of hands and memory, and if someone now brought a bundle in the night, they brought not fear, but a request. Write it down, look at it, compare it. Thus ended the story of how, in the 14th century, in northern Italy, in a small monastic settlement, people brought to light what had long been hidden under seal. The denouement came not with a spear or a fire, but with a notebook where every line was in its place. That was enough to dispel the last shadows.